Welcome to TFR Newsroom. I'm your host, Swapnil Bhartia, and we have with us once again Chip Childers, Executive Director of Cloud Foundry Foundation. Chip, the Cloud Foundry Summit Virtual is almost here. It will be organized between 21st and 22nd of July. I wish we could have done this in person, but we have to still do it virtually. And this is, I think, second or third Cloud Foundry virtual event, but some formats have changed over years. So what I want to know from you is tell me how different will this summit be as compared to the previous ones?
Well, we're getting better at the virtual events, first of all. And I think the main thing is that what we realized running two virtual events in 2020 was that one virtual event that's just positioned in the right time zone to support a global audience was really a way to kind of concentrate the whole community together. And then the second thing that we did, which is not tied to the event, it's to spin out other virtual real-time activities that are smaller, lighter weight, and more accessible that we kind of pluck into different time zones. So we've concentrated everything into one virtual event here in 2021, and we've got all the best practices that we learned last year, as well as the things that we figured out how to make virtual and make them more engaging in a virtual way from the in-person events.
With virtual, the beauty is that you are not limited to people who are at venue, because in physical events, visa becomes a big issue, financial can become a big issue, taking time out of work and family can be a challenging. So virtual does allow people to join in from nowhere they are from. So what have you experienced based on these events? And you actually alluded to that earlier in terms of either turnout or interest in the event, attendance?
I think a big benefit of virtual event is that it is much more accessible, right? If you think in terms of travel time, if you think in terms of travel budget, if you think in terms of even people that don't have full-time jobs that relate to Cloud Foundry but are interested, it's less expensive for registration. You don't have to travel, right? So what we saw was we have always had a very global community and a global audience that would come to our events. But what we really saw was that a lot of the developers that may have been able to, if they're on a team of 10, one might have been able to travel if they were lucky and come to an event. But now we're seeing 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 of them registered for the event, and they can view it synchronously or they can view it asynchronously. So that accessibility of the virtual format is pretty amazing, right? Downside, as you mentioned, right, it's not in person. You miss some of the kind of face-to-face interaction. We've kind of come to the realization that we can't replicate the value of real-time face-to-face interaction. What we can do is try to provide for appropriate virtual interaction models. And so, we learned a lot last year. We're going to apply it to the event this year. And then going forward into 2022, I'm certainly hopeful that we have a return to in-person events. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to strand those that have had access to the event over the last 2020 and 2021 years. We need to find a way to make it more hybrid so that our educational material, the opportunity for collaboration, all of that in some way remains just as accessible as it's been these last 2 years.
Yeah, one thing that because I've been attending it, is that if you're in one event, you're missing out on everything else. Number one is. Number two, you have to plan very, strictly. Third is that sometimes it also takes time for the videos to be uploaded. But what happened with this, it's like on demand, you can see it. So I do love the idea that a lot of organizers are coming with hybrid event, which is a mix of you can do in person, but people who cannot attend can also do that. Because just because something is going virtual does not mean, because people do value in-person, interaction and experience.
Yep, that you're exactly right. I mean, it's there are benefits to both types of experiences, but there's also big downsides to both type of experiences. And so I'm not alone. I know that most organizations that run any type of an event are kind of scratching their heads and going, how do we bring the best of both worlds together so that people can choose, right, based on their own comfort level for travel, their own opportunity for travel or lack of opportunity for travel, and possibly even because a good virtual event you don't have to wait for the publication of the videos. They're already there. You just kind of go to them immediately after the session's over. So it's just much more accessible. So how do we bring all this together? I don't know. I think 2022 will be yet another year of experimenting and learning and trying to kind of progress the state of the art for at least technology industry events.
Of course, you are the organizer of this event is like a baby to you. So I don't want you to be biased, but if I ask you, what are the tracks that you are excited about, or what are the tracks that you would be attending?
There are 3 tracks that are happening concurrently throughout the event. In the Wild, which is end user stories, end user experiences, great technical content from these users talking about how they use Cloud Foundry, how they apply it to their use cases. The second, how to. These are kind of the fundamental blocking and tackling, like how do you do X, Y, or Z? But also there's a few interesting talks in there that are not directly tied to Cloud Foundry, but perhaps they're technologies that you might choose to deploy on top of it. And then the third track is Behind the Curtain. That is all about interaction between and with the open source community who creates the Cloud Foundry software. So they're all happening at the same time. Now, each one of those tracks has a lot of really interesting talks inside of them. My approach to the event, and I think that many people will approach it this way, is that we're going to pick at every talk slot, we're going to pick one of those 3 tracks to go to, depending on what talk looks interesting, the most interesting. And then we're also going to go back and watch a bunch of videos afterwards, which that's a lot of content. It's going to be a lot of information, a lot of learning. But I think the value is there for people to go back in addition to picking what looks most intriguing. Just throwing a couple of very quickly talks out that are kind of top of mind for me. I'll point to a talk by Liberty Mutual Insurance that's going to be a real world walkthrough of how to migrate applications into and between Cloud Foundry environments. I think that's incredibly practical. I know that they're doing it based on a large number of deployed applications, and they build up a real robust set of knowledge about how to do these migrations. So that's going to be really neat. There are talks from both IBM and SAP that deal with some of the both challenges that they, as multi-tenant, massive scale providers of Cloud Foundry clusters, have. Both in scaling as well as in security and multi-tenancy. They're going to kind of dig deep into implementation details there. I think that's going to be really neat. And there are talks on internals of how the open source community itself builds and tests Cloud Foundry. They're interested, they're very interesting if you want to understand some of the thinking that what I kind of call the platform plumbers of our community, right? The people that create this software, the way they think about these problems. So one of those talks is going to be about how chaos engineering principles are being applied to testing the platform. Another good example would be the migration from a REST-based API to using Kubernetes-based CRDs in the platform architecture. So custom resource definitions. Those will be both, I think, really educational, as well as, if you're not necessarily using any of those technologies, techniques, or patterns, they'll be just a really good way to kind of get a sense of what's the power of a CRD, or how does chaos engineering help me? And then just kind of fast forward and say, well, what are some of the technologies that are used with apps deployed into Cloud Foundry or in apps deployed to Cloud Foundry? I think I'll highlight 2 of them. So one of them is Comcast is going to spend a bunch of time talking about machine learning, how they look at machine learning as a way to augment basic business application functionality, and practical examples of how they've done that in order to service their clients better. And then the second is an introduction to WebAssembly, which is growing in interest throughout the developer communities. Another would be WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is really, frankly, I think, growing in interest in the developer communities. So there'll be an introduction to it, how it might be deployed into a Cloud Foundry-based environment. And I think also some talk about how WebAssembly might be employed inside of the Cloud Foundry architecture, So that'll be a lot of fun as well.
Right. You're talking about education, and one thing that happens with, especially with Cloud Foundry and other situations, is there used to be on-hands training, certification program, and other things. Are they still there?
Yes. In fact, hands-on labs were one of the more successful things that we had as part of our events last year. They were so successful that they were, double or triple the attendance that we would have in the in-person version. So we decided to actually continue to run virtual hands-on labs, even outside the dates and times of our events. So, you could go to hands-on labs that our community leads anytime you want. Take a look at our calendar and cloudfoundry.org. However, yes, they're back. So if you're registered for the event, there are also going to be hands-on labs there. It's also where we introduce new hands-on labs that the community's developed. And so there should be a lot of really good educational opportunities there.
Recently, there was a call for nominations for the Technical Oversight Committee. Will there be any announcement regarding to that?
We are currently, our community is running an election. They're going through an election process to elect their first Technical Oversight Committee. We're doing a bit of a change to the way the technical governance of the Cloud Foundry project has been operated historically. We've seen enough change in our ecosystem. We've seen enough adjustment of kind of comings and goings of people that it made sense to let the community that's here today building it sort of reset and say, how do we want to actually operate and make decisions? So that's super exciting. It's running right now. We will end up announcing the winners of the first Technical Oversight Committee election on June 17th. So that will be before the event. But at the event, we have a panel, which if there's no other reason to go, this is really the reason. There's a panel that's going to be of community leaders from the Cloud Foundry open source community, including the newly elected Technical Oversight Committee, that are going to have an opportunity to not just discuss amongst themselves some of the key questions that our community is puzzling over today, but also to interact with the audience in real time, to just have a really great, healthy, what's next type of conversation. So that is going to be an amazing panel.
Chip, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about the upcoming summit. I'm looking forward to attending it. Thank you.
Swap, thank you.